You are still nevertheless, though, given your advocacy work, very worried about the birth rate issue.
Yes, yes.
So probably the strongest argument, or the most common argument that you will hear against your position is, what about the environment?
Yes.
What is your response to that?
So there are a couple ways to look at this, right? So what we see and what we're trying to prevent is something close to a cultural monoculture in the future. So the problem is, birth rates are dropping in developed countries. Okay, we can all kind of agree on that. And eventually they will drop and drop and drop. And many cultures, as a result of that, will go extinct. Eventually, obviously, like they'll keep converting people. We have sort of the rhino problem as we discussed it, right? So then, eventually some cultures will no longer be able to grow through conversion. And like the Shakers, who primarily converted through orphanages, they got extinct because, they didn't have sex. They got extinct after the state started taking that on. So, eventually cultures who depend on conversion for new members are going to run out of their source. They're going to disappear. Okay, that's fine. But what's going to remain? A bunch of cultures who manage to maintain high birth rates. So what we will likely see is a big plummet in birth rates, and then we're going to see a spike, more and more, perhaps
from the
because
survivors.
From the survivors, the survivors who, given certain trends that are at play, I mean, what we see right now is the big correlatory factors with high birth rates are female disempowerment and poverty, which not great in like, as far as we're concerned. Like, we're really, really, really freaking worried about that. It's a lot of people use like feminism as the grounds for not having kids because, you have to sort of give up a lot of independence to have kids. But feminism depends on people who are feminist having kids. So anyway, back to environmentalists though, because, the environment, yes, it matters. So if you really care about the environment, you would probably want to see, instead of the population plummeting and then spiking again, is the population leveling off in a sustainable fashion.
And very gradually.
Because of course, environmentalists, they understand, ecosystems, right? There's S curves and there's J curves, which is something you commonly see with populations and ecosystems. An S curve is what you expect to see with like a good, like some kind of nice pond algae where sometimes there's a little more of it, then it goes back down, then it goes back up. But like the bad pond algae has what's called a J curve where it goes way, 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 way up until everything in the pond dies because there's way too much algae. Then it plummets because everything in the pond is dead. So, what we want to see is that sort of sustainable, like, okay, leveling off of population. But in order for that to happen, we think you need to see the same plurality or more of what we're seeing now so that as populations sort of lift everyone up and hopefully lift, even impoverished high birth rate cultures up to not just sustainable birth rates. And by sustainable, I mean not way too many people, but also not to the point of extinction, then we can all kind of coexist at reasonable numbers going forward. So, we're not advocates for forever growing population. We are advocates for sustainable levels, but we don't think that you get to that by just saying, well, I hope people just stop having kids. Also, we should keep in mind that we're getting very, very good with conservation, with technology that helps to reduce the human's carbon footprint on the planet, that in, a couple of generations, the net contribution of an additional human to the overall like greenhouse gas footprint of the world may be fairly trivial. So, just to say, well, you can't, humans are too wasteful is not necessarily the right or accurate thing to do. And of course, there are many things that we can choose to do with our lives. Not eat meat, live in a city, not have a car that would, reduce our impact. So those are some easier refutations. And of course, the final argument that I made earlier, sort of the psychographic profile of someone who cares about the environment will be systematically bred out of the population if these people choose to not have kids.
Yeah. Like if you're someone who's super anxious about climate change, there's a fairly good chance that your children are going to be the sort of people who might genuinely contribute to whatever the development of new types of energy or whatever it is we need. Are you familiar with this 3-part classification system for environmentalists, the light greens, the dark greens, and the bright greens?
No, tell me.
So light greens are people who just kind of want to nibble around the edges, who are quite conservative about it, who want to do sort of slight reductions, but not radical, in order to reduce our impact on the planet. The dark greens are the Extinction Rebellion types who think that our entire way of life is completely inimical to the climate and want to overhaul capitalism and so on. And the bright greens are the people who think technology is the answer. So Elon Musk is a bright green, for instance. And I think maybe you are a bright green. And I think I'm a bright green. I just think that the idea of sort of crashing the population, even aside from all of the concerns that you raise, which are completely legitimate. One, if you really think that climate catastrophe is going to hit us in a century, that's actually not quick enough. Even if we all went to South Korean fertility levels, you wouldn't drop the population quickly enough to actually...
Well, we saw with the pandemic, like we got down to like terminal levels of emissions, right? Everything had stopped. We were all shut in our houses. We're losing our minds. And yet still we weren't at the levels that were necessary per various people's goals. And we're just like, oh, look at this. We can shut down the world and it's still not enough.
Yeah.
Like we have to take other measures.
To still be using fossil fuels, you need the population to be so much lower than it is now. So barring some kind of completely catastrophic event, lower birth rates is not going to get us there, which means that the only thing to do is to have better tech. And the way to get better tech is through people being innovative.
Yeah, I would say, better tech and better immigration policy. I think something that's super underrated in climate change is, listen, like we have to just plan for a lot of this. It's going to happen regardless, even if like we somehow like halved half the population, it's still going to be an issue. So how do we set up international treaties that allow for the migration of people who are going to have to leave their nations because of climate change, because it gets too hot, because rolling blackouts could cause, millions of people to die because they overheat and they can't get air conditioning, all this sort of stuff. I would prefer for us to be planning around instead of, arguing over whether we're using plastic straws. So
yeah, plastic straws is a classic light green concern.
Yeah. But
yes.